I'm Douglas Mason, President and CEO of Rainy Mountain Royalty Corp., RMO on the TSX Venture Exchange. Rainy Mountain's Brunswick property is located in the Rideout Shear Zone in Ontario. With grab samples running as high as 32 grams per ton gold, a drill program will commence this spring to test the numerous targets located by recent groundwork. For more information, visit our website, rmroyalty.com.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is real estate consultant Ross Kay from the wealthyhomeowner.ca. Welcome back to the show, Ross.
Hey, thanks for having me back, Jim.
A bank poll indicates that 54% of Canadians believe housing prices will never fall. What's your comment on that?
I think before anyone supernavigated the world in a sailing vessel, probably more than 55% of the world population believed that the world was flat. What you have here is simply how the public has been misinformed and how the conversation on real estate has been so tightly controlled that people believe absolute, utter nonsense. The world was not flat. Housing prices do not go up forever. It is a mathematical impossibility for that to happen. In a housing market, like if that 55% understood, they're twin sisters in any housing market. One's called equity and the other's called debt. And these twin sisters work together every single real estate market throughout history, and they work in tandem. As one gains weight, in other words, as equity gains weight, that allows debt to gain weight at basically 2.5 times the rate. So anyone who believes that the average Canadian home 25 years from now will be selling for $1.3 million and that first-time buyers will be able to make mortgage payments of somewhere around $65,000 to $7,000 a month, then they should believe housing prices will never drop. If you realize how absurd it is to think that a first-time buyer will be able to make housing payments of $7,000 a month 25 years from now without a windfall of income. In other words, Canada will separate itself from the rest of the world, and all of a sudden wages will start to escalate in Canada for everybody at a world-leading, I don't know, we're probably talking 5 times the pace what everybody else would do. Housing prices cannot go up forever because equity and debt will not let that happen.
Do you think with Toronto still continuing with their real estate bubble, Vancouver's already had their last hurrah? Although it's still very expensive. Don't let anybody think that Vancouver's cheaper. It's just compared to maybe a year ago, it's a little less expensive. It's still very expensive, isn't it?
It's expensive in terms of what people that live in Vancouver can actually pay. But you've got to remember now, we are only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. April will be the 11th month of your market correction from when it started happening 11 months ago. You'll only be 11 months in. It takes that long for a full rollover of the housing market to take place. What I mean by that is that even though the market will be full negative during the month of April, meaning anybody who bought a home prior to the April of last year, their home's value, but if an appraisal was done on it, that home would show that the people have lost money owning it over the last 12 months. We call that a full negative. That's not going to get reported in Vancouver probably till July or August, because everybody out there listens, and the press, it's the media's fault. The fault is, I'm sorry, they use the benchmark price reporting methodology, which trails the market. Earlier, it was trailing the market in British Columbia by 8 months. That 8-month gap has dropped now to 4 months. And then by the time we hit July and August, it'll probably be back down to the traditional 2 months. At that time, people will realize, whoops, what happened? As we've told you on this show, and as we've told all of those who get the intelligence from us, you have months of advance notice before any damage is done to you personally as a homeowner, as long as you're getting the right intelligence on the housing market. People have had a full year almost to react based on what we have foretold right here on this show. If they didn't do it, I'm sorry. Now it's your own fault. Case in point, when I'm looking at our data, how we measure the market, we know that in last July, after the fantastic March, April, May, and June numbers were reported in Vancouver sales, for the sake of the argument, housing prices peaked at $150,000 a year-over-year gain. $150,000. The average home that was being purchased for $150,000 more than it was the year before. Right now, in the month of March, at the end of March, that was actually minus $1,000. So the average home buyer in Vancouver at the end of March of this year was actually paying less for a home than they were paying the year before. I'm sure you haven't heard those numbers released anywhere, but that is simply the truth. Hopefully your listeners will go back and listen to the old shows, vet what I have to say, make sure what I'm saying is the truth, and then they take the appropriate action. Because if you're going to be selling your property, you're going to be relying on that home equity that you've built up while the market was being impacted by foreign buyers, fake house price news, and unethical real estate practices. Your window has closed. The door is about to slam shut. You need to get advice on how to move forward.
We'll have more with Ross Kay right after the break.
Aben Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and the Yukon. Trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the pink symbol ABN-AF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Aben's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at abenresources.com.
I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese, Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome back. We're chatting with Ross Kay. Ross, do you have the latest numbers for Vancouver, and was there a delay in reporting them?
I think, Jim, what you're talking about is how the numbers get reported, how the press interprets them, and how the public are generally misled. So let me frame it to you this way so your listeners will understand a little bit easier. Real estate statistics were created for the benefit of the sellers of real estate. What that means is that up until about 2005, on the national basis, some provinces were earlier, 2000, some provinces were 2005. Nova Scotia just took care of their rules this year, actually. But up until 2005, all real estate agents across Canada for the sake of the argument, had a legal obligation to get the seller the highest price. What that means is even the buyer's rep. So if my sister wanted to buy a house in Ontario prior to that period, I was legally obligated to try to get my sister to pay the most money possible to buy that house, even on a house that I didn't have listed, even on a house was listed with a totally different brokerage and a different company. My obligation was always to the seller. That is the law of the land in Canada. The result of that is for the last 50 years, the 50 years prior to this taking place, every single housing statistic was created to benefit sellers because there was a legal obligation for organized real estate to only represent sellers. You can listen to all the nonsense that the real estate boards are spouting off about representing buyers. We represent both sides of the transaction. If that was true, all of the metrics that they release as statistics would have changed in 2005 to more accurately report the market to both the buyer and the seller equally. That has not taken place. You received the exact same statistics that people received in 1990. They have not changed at all. The reason for that is organized real estate, if the public ever finds out that for over a decade, organized real estate has lied to them because they presented seller-side metrics to the consumer, seller beneficial metrics to the consumer, instead of buyer beneficial metrics, or at least unbiased metrics, organized real estate would blow up. It would be destroyed. There would be no credibility. These big franchise companies would be gone. It would be class action lawsuits. Excuse my language. All hell would break loose. So all of real estate, they just ignore it. Now, a lot of that is ignorance. Not only do the members that are out there selling today don't have a clue to what I just said, they weren't involved in organized real estate when those metrics were being formed, how they were released to the press, and the fact that they really mean nothing. They are statistics released to support sellers getting a higher price for their home. So when we're talking about Vancouver, any reporter in Vancouver, any reporter could take the press release released from the Real Estate Board of Greater Vancouver and read the footnotes. And the footnotes clearly state that these are sales counts reported to the MLS system during the month of March, for the sake of the argument. It at no time says this reflects the number of sales that took place in Vancouver during the month of March, because no real estate board in Canada anywhere releases that number. They release the number of sales reported to the MLS system by the members of their association from the first of the month to the last of the month. This is not the sales that took place then, because if each real estate board has a different time period, that you have to report the sales. Some of those boards, you've got to report a sale within 24 hours. Others, which is the common one, is 48 hours, and others have 7 and 10 days before you have to report a sale that took place to the board. So let's look at Vancouver once again. Again, as previously said in your show, when we look at the data, we don't look at the statistics. We look at the data. So we know that the Real Estate Board, Greater Vancouver, reported statistics in the last 2 days of the month of March that suggested the average selling price in the last 2 days of the month was over $1.1 million. We also know that in the first 2 days, or the day immediately after, on the 1st of April, they reported a selling price of only $960,000. That is not possible. That is a result of reporting sales through an MLS system to reporting the number of sales that actually took place. So this is where your numbers get screwed up, and this goes back to your question about are sales being misreported. No, they're being reported. What's happening is they're being misread. They're being read without the knowledge of how to read what those numbers actually say. So my firm, I mean, a lot of the net worth of my firm is simply because of the 61 different sets of rules and regulations that are released every single month in Canada. My firm knows how to read each one set of those statistics that are released. We can then compare that against the data, and we know exactly how much the consumer is being misled or misdirected. Unless your listeners have access to the metrics that are measuring the market correctly, which you cannot get from any organized real estate or anyone who licensed the realtor trademark. You cannot get it from those people. It's illegal for them to do so. You will be believing, like the 55% of Canadians that CIBC reported, housing prices will always go up. My answer to that is yes, folks. I know there's people who probably still believe the world is flat.
Are listings in Vancouver increasing?
Okay, so I know that a bunch of pundits out your way who are now trying to pretend that they know how to interpret real estate data have come to the forefront and said, in the condo area we've got bidding wars, and that because our listing counts are down, and that's a result of that issue. In other words, it's a hot market for condos. Even though the market's correcting massively, they're making this claim. They don't tell anybody that there's 500 fewer condos sold this March versus last March. Now, I don't have the stats in front of me on that, so that's off the top of my mind. I know there were hundreds of less. They don't tell you how the mix of condos has shifted, and how that places like West Vancouver, Howe Sound have really not had a drop in condo sales as some of the other markets where prices are lower, which creates a skewed view of the market for anyone listening to a realtor or organized real estate. That is simply a falsehood. What happens in stage 2 of a house price correction, which is Vancouver is now in stage 2. Stage 2 is homeowners begin to realize they can't see those big house prices that they thought they were going to get 11 months ago or even 6 months ago. They can't get those prices any longer. The homeowners react to that by not listing their homes for sale. Real estate misreads that number and suggests that has something to do with supply, which is a myth. If you look at the number of sales the number of listings that are coming to the market versus the number of listings coming off the market, then you have an understanding of what happens in stage 2 of a house price correction. We're in a period where a rebalance of the market takes place, where the consumer has to come to grips. They're going to have to take less for their home in order to sell it. That's what they have to come to grips with. While that is ongoing, that change takes 2 or 3 months. While that change takes place, people aren't listing their home in the market because they can't get what they need out of the property. Reality hits home 3, 4, 5 months later, and all of a sudden your listings start to balloon again as fear of missing out flips over to fear of missing out on getting as much money as I can for my house. I've already missed out on a chance. It's getting worse each and every day. So your listing counts right now are deceiving because our housing market is never functioning in the same way for any 2 months. Housing markets don't go from January to December. They travel a totally different path, and unless you're reading that path along the way, you will continue to believe the world is flat.
We'll have more with Ross Kay right after this.
I'm Bill McWilliam, president of Cascadero Copper, CCD on the TSX Venture Exchange. Cesium is one of the world's rarest metals with a growing industrial demand. Drilling is underway on our Tehran property in Argentina to prove up a cesium resource. Cascadero's patent-pending leach process has the potential to make Cascadero the lowest cost supplier of cesium in the world. Visit our website, cascadero.com, or phone us at 604-924-5504.
Keep informed. Receive our weekly recap of thought-provoking articles, podcasts, and radio delivered to your inbox for free. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage, HowStreet.com. Welcome back. We're speaking with Ross Kay. Ross, are foreclosures beginning to affect the Calgary market?
Okay, so how foreclosures work. Again, there's so many things to debunk. It's the magnitude of the debunking is ridiculous. I know they call it EI now. The unemployment numbers. Okay, the people who are coming off employment insurance. That is one of the key indicators of potential foreclosure rates increasing. Especially in a place like Calgary, where oil workers were, generally really well paid, and they were making substantial income, which allowed them to own homes in this low interest rate environment that they otherwise would not pay for. In other words, the house price illusion, the housing bubble that took place in Alberta, the people are now coming to realize it's impossible for housing prices to be as high as they were on some of that new inventory that was coming into the market. What happens as the employment and insurance benefits start to end? Then all of a sudden the risk for foreclosure happens because there's no way for those mortgage payments to take place. There is then normally a 3 to 6 month period where the banks look to cover their butts and try to get themselves out of the mess by making poor lending decisions, and they try to convince the existing owners to sell during that period of time. The smart people will sell during that period of time because they'll minimize their loss and they'll walk away with some other money. Others will listen to organized real estate, or the banks, or someone else who suggests to them that they hold out and wait for the market to turn around so that they can sell. Or they'll listen to a real estate agent. They will list their house at a price that's too high, losing key marketing months of time, and at the same time, during that period, the mortgage goes into more arrears. Once the all of those independent functions are happening, that's when you see your foreclosure rates start to rise. Now, of course, remember in Alberta, here's my keys, I'm walking away from my house, is still possible. And you really are not going to pay a consequence because of that, like in other provinces. So what you have in Alberta is you're going to have a tipping point where people say it's better that we just walk away and start all over again than we can't afford to walk away, or if we walk away, our life is destroyed, which happens in other provinces. So that's where your foreclosure issue comes into play in Alberta and Calgary in particular. And don't forget, let's not forget Alberta is also getting a tragedy bump. You've got all those houses that have to be replaced in Fort McMurray. You've got all that insurance money that is being taken from Fort McMurray and being spent in Edmonton and Calgary as families decide that we're going to set up our new home in a town other than Fort McMurray. So there's actually a massive capital flow from outside of Fort McMurray as those insurance funds are made, and that is also giving a small boost to GDP for Alberta, and it is also creating a bit of an illusion with the Alberta housing market because, of course, those unhomed families now have the cash to go out and find another home for themselves, which will give a little bit of a boost to the market, which organized real estate will misrepresent to the public and pretend that everything is fine, which is really not the case.
What's new in the Toronto market?
What's new in the Toronto market is that the parallels between the greater Toronto area and the greater Vancouver area of last year at the exact same month are identical. The market, the housing bubble inflator. So your housing mix, the mix of sales that are taking place in greater Toronto are now shifted to the same place that they were in greater Vancouver at this time last year. The difference between Toronto's market and Vancouver's market is Vancouver's was impacted by the buyers of ultra-luxury class homes that with foreign capital. So that's where the hole in the financing and the debt and the equity transfer that we found last year does not exist in the Toronto market. It is a natural escalation of housing prices during a peak housing bubble. So this is real Canadians who are going to be damaged totally in this case, whereas some of the damage was offset in Vancouver with foreign owners. In the Greater Toronto area, last month, our housing bubble index for that CMA crossed the 500 barrier. Now, you have to go back to March of 2017 or 2016 in Vancouver to see another bubble metric, monthly bubble metric in that kind of extreme. Toronto, in the last 2 months, the bubble meter has just reached a point where we're probably looking at the bubble popping. We just have to look at to see how it goes. Odds are in the GTA market during the rest of the year, if these bank economists are correct, and we're going to see a $150,000 gain in the average selling price that they use, not us, they use to represent the market to the population, then for the rest of this month, the average selling price monthly gains will actually be less than the annual rate of growth required to hit the 150,000. So much. All this means is it's just that if you listen to organized real estate or realtors or banks and you get your housing market intelligence from them, understand whatever they tell you in a given month is not the truth. It is a misrepresentation of the housing market to you. So right now, the huge misrepresentation that's going on in the GTA is almost identical to what the misrepresentation was out in Vancouver last year. The only difference, the one unique factor that you will not find reported anywhere in Canada today is, at peak house price growth in Vancouver in 2016, prices were increasing at a pace of 17.34% a year. So you heard all those 60% gains in house prices. You're hearing the exact same thing in the GTA right now. But what you're not being told is the truth. The truth is some houses were selling for 60% more in price. But the overall market peaked at 17.27% in Greater Vancouver. Toronto's market is still peaking, and last month it hit 20.79%. I know the real estate boards told everybody housing prices were up 33%, and that was published across Canada. Actually, around the globe it was published. Every economist took that as fact. Every economist wrote on it. Every bank wrote on it. The truth of the matter is, that was over 60% inflated year-over-year gain. The real gain was only 20.79%. But 20.78%, that actually was a $133,000 gain in 1 year. Where Vancouver, at its peak, it was $149,000. I'll let your listeners consider that.
Are banks pooling subprime securitized Canadian mortgages and selling them to global investors?
I would suspect so, Jim. I would suspect that that's common business practice. I don't like the use of subprime when it comes to Canada, because subprime, by our definition of subprime, means the lender does not have the ability to get their funds back out of the property. So, in other words, the lender has been so reckless with their lending, they're relying on further house price gains and for the mortgagee to hold on paying their mortgage long enough for the bank to foreclose and be able to break even. That's what happened in the United States. These houses what we call are full subprime, where that there is no way the house price was going to increase enough and the mortgage debt to be paid down enough at a high enough rate for those foreclosures to result in no damage being done to the banks. Your listeners need to understand it is common in the United States of America for people to take out a 30-year loan with an interest rate that lasts all 30 years. So when those numbers don't work out, in other words, house prices aren't increasing enough to offset any further principal being paid off on the mortgages, as the housing prices are correcting, then you have what we would call a subprime loan. That's a full subprime. That's how our firm defines full subprime. You don't get that in Canada. What you have is you have the ability of the banks to reach out and put their hands around the necks of the consumer and shake the consumer up and down till all the money's out of their pockets, protecting the bank and dropping the consumer onto the curb, homeless. That's how the Canadian system functions, and it may have been designed that way. I really can't say that was the intent, but that is how it functions. So in Canada, the banks have zero risk. It's the consumer, the homeowner, who assumes all that risk. And if the bank even suspects that there's a problem with your mortgage that would qualify it as a subprime at any moment at time in the future, they'll grab you by the neck, shake you up and down till all the money's out of your pockets, throw you to the curb to protect their shareholders. That's why the crassness, the ignorance, the insults that I see when the banks report on housing to the consumer, I have a hard time stomaching. Because I know what the consequences are, I know how it works, I know that the consumer has been misled about how it works for decades. I know that people use, the taxpayer's on the hook for CMHC. The taxpayer is not on the hook for CMHC, listeners. That is not the truth. When you look at the math about how the mortgage evolves over time, CMHC has no risk. When you look at the amount of interest, the insurance that's been paid, the foreclosure rate would have to be staggering for any losses to the taxpayer ever to happen. It's all a myth. It's all used to control the process. Or the people who are making these policies are really this ignorant to how housing markets and home ownership works.
Ross, before we go, we have a listener question from Ross Collette. He says, he quotes you as saying, Ross K says it's a myth that lower end condo prices are still rising, but does he really know what's happening in the condo market in the lower mainland? In the New Westminster area, condos have risen thousands since last year. There's hardly anything now for under 200,000 compared to last year. Condos I considered looking at are now listed 40 to 50,000 more than they were last year. What do you have to say on that?
What I have to say is this. This is another listener who is believing realtor speak on how to interpret the housing market. She is speaking about the lowest priced homes virtually in British Columbia at $200,000. We are talking an entry-level first-time buyer. She's describing a condo. Is she describing a condo where you're going to see a huge special assessment be assigned to that property in the coming years? Is she confusing a small 40% increase in price, which I know sounds really high, and some of the listeners say, what's Ross talking about? Now he's saying a $40,000 increase isn't that amount. Well, when your interest rates are at 2.4% on $40,000 gain, it's only another $160 a month. Now, I know, well, people say, well, Ross, that's the difference between whether or not we can afford a house or not. Correct, which is why you rent. If you cannot, this is what's actionable from virtually everything I say on this show, Jim. It's, if you can't afford the math, don't do it. If you need to move to the suburbs, if you want to own a home, and you need to move to the suburbs at a cost, because travel's cost, then that's what you need to do. It is a personal choice. Home ownership is a personal choice. You can choose to live in a rented home, or you can choose to live in a home that you own. Now, there is an added cost to live in the home that you own, but there are also a plethora of long-term benefits to owning a home. What I can tell you is this. If you can purchase a condominium for $200,000 in British Columbia in 2017, by the time 25 and 40 years rolls in, you're going to be okay, because that condominium has so much room to go up in price. It doesn't matter. Odds are the builder cannot build that property for the same price today. All of your listeners need to understand one law of real estate, or one law of home ownership, and that's this. If the home cannot be rebuilt for the price that it's selling at, you're making a good decision. If the home can be rebuilt for the same price that you're paying or less, you are making a bad financial decision. The decision then becomes one of choice. I personally want to own the home that I call home. That is my choice. I am willing to pay extra to do so. That is the question that every Canadian household needs to answer. They need to answer it after they've been delivered the facts, short-term, long-term, really long-term, and the reality of what those 25 to 40-year windows are going to look like. When they've had that explained to them, they can sit back and make a rational decision that is in the best interest of them and their families. Without that information, without having someone independent speaking to them clearly, precisely, and saying, here are the facts, this is what it means, now you decide what you want to do. Oh, by the way, call up your accountant, your lawyer, your financial advisor. Make sure what the details that we're giving you are true, that they're supporting the same argument. Without that, you're going to have 55% of Canadians believing housing prices go up forever.
Ross, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thanks a lot, Jim.
My guest has been real estate consultant Ross Kay from thewealthyhomeowner.ca. You're listening to HoweStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Questions for the show or for our guests can be sent to info@HoweStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HoweStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HoweStreet.com radio is a production of HoweStreet Media Incorporated.